Hello and welcome to episode 228 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, as always, joined by Evan Silva, and we are joined by Director of Analytics, Michael Leone, for the third part of this epic, historic, four-part series. Leone, how's it going today?
It's going well. I got a 5K race tonight, so I'm going to get outside. No sun because it's rainy and gloomy in Buffalo, but I will be outside.
Beautiful.
I need to get on these prop bets that you get on, Levitan.
Yeah, it's the only way I can exercise if there's money involved. I really have a lot of problems. My therapist would tell you herself. When you said 5K, I thought you were talking about money. I got excited for a second. Then I realized you were talking about distance and not as excited. Evan, how's it going today?
It's going real well. We just signed up for a live main event draft on Monday night that all three of us are going to do together. I'm going to be really interested to see how Leone does, in high pressure situations. Like, what if something, some news breaks while we're on the clock, the spreadsheets don't align? How is he going to be able to adjust and make changes on the fly? I can't wait to draft with Leone.
Yeah, it's going to be great. What Evan's referring to, I believe it's $1,850 $1,800 season-long tournament that we just registered for, that all three of us are going to try to draft and manage together without killing each other first. So that should be a fun time. We'll live stream it Monday night. Stay tuned for details on that. All right. On today's show, we're going to break down all things wide receiver for the 2021 fantasy football season: tiers, optimal strategy, guys we like, guys we don't, etc. I hope you've checked out the first two parts of this series where we discussed quarterback and then running back. That's just a taste of what you will find in our draft kit. Things are going to change between now and your draft. Our rankings, tiers, strategy, analysis, continuously updates with the news and our thoughts straight up until week one. So be sure you have our draft kit. It is just $34.99. Also, have had a ton of questions about this Underdog promo. To be clear, if you are new to Underdog, you get $35 for free with a $10 deposit. If you're already on Underdog, they'll just give you $10 in your account because you signed up at ETR. So if you sign up for the draft kit, easy game, should be simple. If you want to play best ball, take the money. All right, let's get into it here, boys, with the most fun position of all, the wide receiver position. Let's zoom out, Leone, from a macro stance. How are you thinking about wide receiver this year, specific to this year's actual tiers and options?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many options at wide receiver this year. If you're a wide receiver, early, heavy drafter, you're excited this season. We've got, Devontae Adams starting to move up earlier in the first round. Now Rodgers stuff is solidified, but I've drafted out of the 12th spot and gotten Diggs at times, gotten Tyreek Hill at times. You get Ridley or DeAndre Hopkins coming back. The third to fourth round is really loaded with the Rams guys, the Cowboys guys, the Bengals guys on the back end of that. So you really have really strong options. I think rounds 1 through 5, middle of round 5, you do start to see a drop off. I think like after Adam Thielen, after T Higgins, it's, do you want to reach for a Brandon Ayuk type? How early do you value Robbie Anderson? So I do like to get a lot of wide receivers in the first 4 rounds, first 5 rounds before that drop off occurs, because I feel like it starts to flatten out a little bit, where if I can get Jerry Jeudy in the 7th round or Debo in the 8th round, I feel just as good about that as some of the wide receivers that sometimes go at the end of 5 that go at the beginning of the 6th round. So that's a point in the draft where maybe I'll take a detour and take, a tight end or an elite QB or something. And then when we get into double digit rounds, I think it's really about rookies and breakout players, especially in managed leagues. We're going to roll through waivers so much throughout the year that we don't have to worry too much about base projected points. If you've drafted really running back heavy early, that might change and you might want to get some of the guys that just project well, but I'm really into the rookies, the Moores, Rondell in particular, Elijah, trying to just take some swings that you catch a real breakout season from one of these guys.
Evan, 3 wide receivers I think are strong first round picks. I don't know the last time we could actually say that. What do you think about the wide receiver position this year as a whole relative to other years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a position that I think that you enter each season looking at it and expecting it to be really deep. I mean, on down, my wide receiver 60 right now is Emmanuel Sanders. I think he's got a chance at 60 catches, 850 yards and 7 touchdowns. he's got a shot to be relevant throughout the year in that style of an offense where they're going to play a lot of 3 receiver and 4 receiver sets, and they're going to throw the ball at a highly, highly voluminous rate. But it starts to thin out really quickly. And it's also a position where it's really hard to get studs off the waiver wire. Maybe 2 or 3 studs will pop off the waiver wire, whereas, 5, 6, 7, 8 running backs, every week starters at running backs will pop off the waiver wire. Mm-hmm. So, but I mean, I agree with you that it's really, really strong at the top. And I would even say that although I don't necessarily have Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, definitely have Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and Stephon Diggs as locked in first round picks. I think that you can make a case for Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins also to be deserving of first round valuation. Calvin Ridley is going to have a massive ADOT this year. He has averaged historically over the past 2 years, 3.8 more targets in games that were missed by Julio Jones. He's averaged well over 100 yards in games that were missed by Julio Jones. And DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, he showed, with very little practice time. Remember, he missed like almost all of training camp with a hamstring injury. He just jumped in week 1, had 9 catches for 151 from Kyler, and wound up having a really, really strong season, is still on the right side of 30. So I think you have actually 5 receivers that you can make a real good case for them to all be first round valuations.
Yeah. And if you look at Evan's tiers, he does have 5 wide receivers in his tier 1 bunch together. I think, Leone, one more zooming out question. I think last year, these quarterback wide receiver numbers were like outlier efficient. I mean, there were just historic numbers put up by passing games last year. Do we think that's a COVID induced outlier type thing, or is this going to continue where the NFL is just now, there's so many receivers, 2, 3 receivers on each team that are viable every week in fantasy, and guys are just going off for 100 yards like it's nothing? Or was that a pandemic outlier?
A little column A, a little column B sort of thing, where I did a podcast with JJ Zachariason, and he did note just how much scoring there was in general last year. Lack of preseason and all that might have played into that, but we also are seeing teams just be a little bit sharper in terms of 4th down strategy, play calling strategy, aggressiveness, and that's going to lead to more scoring. So I think we see some regression overall across the league from last year in terms of the amount of scoring and how prolific the receiving passing connections were, but it's trending up over time. And for me, I don't know depending how you feel about that, I don't know if it makes too much of a difference as how you're trying to approach this. The top receivers, I think, are still I don't think the gaps are going to be that much different as you go through the wide receiver position. And Evan mentioned wide receiver being, it's seemingly deep every year, and it's deep in terms of getting usable scores. But if you want to beat people in the flex, if you're in a PPR league, that means you need to have been drafting receivers before that point in time. So it's a waterfall effect. If you're going to beat people in the flex, you need to have beat them at wide receiver 3, which means you had to beat them at wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 1, and it kind of just cascades down. So I do think there's a lot of depth from the increase in scoring and the increase in passing yardage across the league. But the elite players that separate, there's still drop-offs along the way that are important to take advantage of.
Yeah, as for that, sort of scoring explosion, we kind of had a read on that last year. We talked about how after the lockout, there also was an explosion in scoring. And then we saw early in the season, the refs refusing to call holding. Hopefully they continue to only call holding when it's especially egregious, because that added a lot of excitement to the game. But I agree, we'll probably see a little bit of rollback on the scoring. But yeah, I mean, the offenses entered last season, they had an advantage on the defenses.
Sure. I think the more point that I was getting at, and I agree that it doesn't really make that much difference in tiers, is that more and more teams are going heavy pass rate over expectation, right? Whereas 10 years ago, you would have seen way less across the league pass rate over expectation. Anyways.
Teams are doing more play action. Teams are doing more, motion before the snap.
Faster tempo too, just running more plays, period. Dallas isn't super crazy pass happy, but they run so many darn plays that they end up throwing the ball a lot.
Okay. I think one question people have with the wide receiver is, and myself too, if you start with a Tyreek Hill or Steph Diggs or Devontae Adams, can we come back in round 2 with another wide receiver? Because like a start that starts like Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, or Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley, and stuff like that, or Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, like those are exciting starts. But as we mentioned in the running backs episode, you're putting yourself in a hole. You are not getting access to one of those top 2 round running backs who can have just an absolutely season breaking season. So to me, I prefer if I start off with wide receiver to go running back in round 2, particularly because I like a lot of the running backs in round 2. But Leone, do you have any credence to wide receiver starts?
I think there's credence. If you're in a league that's full PPR and it's 2 running backs, 3 wide receiver, and a flex, like those are the type of leagues where I'm willing to go wide receiver. If it's only 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers, it starts to get excessive to go wide receiver, and some of your advantage in doing so is mitigated. And I would rather have the shot at this running back group, which we've talked about a lot, the end of round 1, beginning of round 2. It's pretty flat. All these guys have really strong upside cases. All these guys have some bear cases. But yeah, if you're in that sort of format, the 3 wide receiver full PPR, I think you can go wide receiver. You just have to be comfortable knowing that you're going to have to work the wire at the running back position. You're going to devote, a lot of your late picks and your bench stashes to the running back position to try and get a combination of guys that are going to give you some usable scores and some guys that have some upside if guys get hurt in front of them. But it's definitely viable just because, as I noted, we do start to see a wide receiver drop off in the end of round 5 or so. And if you're picking at, the 1-2 turn, it's pretty advantageous to have 4 pretty elite wide receivers and then maybe one other position mixed in there. And you can start all 4 of those receivers and really realize an edge, all the way down from wide receiver 1 through the flex.
Yeah. And Sean Siegel explained this on a podcast with Leone recently, that the really wide receiver heavy, even 0 RB strategy is, people think of it as boom bust, but it actually gives you a pretty strong floor. If you're going to enter your 3, week 1 of the season with in a 3 wide receiver or double flex full PPR league, with 4 stud wide receivers that you're trotting out, and then you're taking a little bit on at, you're making a sacrifice at a running back position, where you can really just use like a James White or a Nyheim Hines to get you through with 8, 9, 10 points until you work the waiver wire to find an upgrade. That's actually a high floor strategy. So I think it's going wide receiver heavy, going 0 RB it's not as much of a boom bust strategy as a lot of people think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And would also, like we've mentioned on these episodes, you really have to know your league and like what your league members are going to do. If you do know you can kill them, if Jerry Jeudy is going to go in round 7, round 8, Deebo's going to go in round 7, round 8 instead of rounds 5 through 7. Like if you can really have a better player eval on the types of receivers to take there, then yeah, maybe I just take the running back in round 2 because there's no point not to. Like I'm already going to kill you with wide receiver depth. Why would I not just have a better running back that has a better chance at elite season in round 2 and still have that wide receiver edge? But if you're playing with people that are a little bit more in tune to taking wide receivers, that then maybe want to press that advantage early, understanding that you might not get all those breakout guys in round 6 through 9 that you could in a RB heavier, more boomer league.
Exactly. And I think for most people listening to this, playing in home leagues, I think that assuming that we are going to be able to beat them in round 6, 7, 8 is a much better way to go. I think it's a little bit of FPS to try to go with Nyheim Hines and James White as a primary running back in home leagues. I really think that would be a huge mistake in my opinion. Obviously in tougher formats, I think it makes a lot more sense. Anyways, it's hard to poke holes in kind of this first 4 or 5 rounds of wide receivers, as you guys said. I mean, God, the first round, Adams, Hill, Diggs is all strong. Ridley, Hopkins, AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson, those guys are really strong to me. And then you get into the guys that I really like, CeeDee Lamb, Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper, Tyler Lockett, Cooper Kupp, DJ Moore, like all these guys. It's hard to poke holes in these tiers of wide receivers. And that's why when I get to these middle rounds, it's really hard for me. Like I'm okay with Chris Carson, I guess. I don't like Mike Davis, but I'm okay with him if he's going the 6th or 7th round, but I could not fathom I could not fathom going with one of those guys over a wide receiver that I like. Like, I'm not going Chris Carson over DJ Moore. I'm not going Mike Davis over Jerry Jeudy. It's just not happening. And so in the middle rounds there is where I'm just pounding wide receiver so hard. Evan, is there anybody that maybe you don't feel as good about? Because it's hard for me to pick out. I actually think that of the guys we've talked about so far, I feel the worst about DeAndre Hopkins with all the added target competition that he's going to have and the horizontal raid. But I don't really have any big bad things to say about DeAndre Hopkins. I could say a little bit of bad things about Keenan Allen maybe because I think Justin Herbert's going to regress in efficiency, but I don't have any really bad things to say. Is there anybody in the middle rounds you think that is an avoid?
Yeah, I moved way off of DJ Shark. And, it's a lot due to the finger surgery. I don't want my wide receivers entering the season coming off surgery on one of their fingers, but also the mixed reports about his practice performance during training camp. And just like my kind of concern that he could fall to the back end of their wide receiver core. He's in a contract year. This regime did not bring him in. He had a bad season last year. Urban Meyer called him out publicly. So he's a guy that I've really moved off of. I think that in the San Francisco receiver core, I've really built in a lot of separation at this point between Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, because I think that they're going to go to Trey Lance quickly. And they're going to be maybe the run heaviest team in the NFC. I'm not sure they'll be able to catch the Ravens across the league, but I think maybe the run heaviest team in the NFC. And it's going to be like Trey Lance, 13 of 17, and I think that Brandon Ayuk is going to end up out targeting. And Deebo Samuel is going to get shallow manufactured touches and not a whole lot of targets on a weekly basis. You also have George Kittle commanding a significant target share. Those are guys in the middle rounds. I guess those are two guys that kind of stand out.
Yeah. I would say two guys I really like in round 3 when I can get them is Terry McLaurin and CeeDee Lamb. Leone, I think when it gets to round 4 and round 5, it starts to get a little thinner. I still like Jamar Chase. I like that his ADP has dipped on these camp reports, which I don't really buy into too much so far away from week 1. And then when we get to the middle rounds, Leone, is there any certain guys that you're targeting over others or certain guys that you're avoiding in the middle rounds?
So rounds 4 or 5 or after round 5?
Yeah, we can go round 3 to 6. I call the middle rounds.
Yeah. So CeeDee Lamb in the 3rd round. In sharper leagues, he's starting to go sometimes in round 2, early round 3, but I think you'll be able to get him middle round 3 in your home leagues. And I would prioritize him. There's basically this giant tier after Justin Jefferson, DK Metcalf that goes, from CeeDee Lamb, Allen Robinson, McLaurin types, all the way down for me to Julio, Adam Thielen, T. Higgins. And I like everyone in that tier. I'm high on Cooper Kupp, where I think that he could benefit the most from the transition from Jared Goff to Matthew Stafford, where if they do throw a little bit more in the red zone because they trust their quarterback more because Cam Akers isn't there, that's where Cooper Kupp could really benefit. And I think looking at their personnel, there's a better chance he stays on the field more than, he's had some weird seasons the last 2 years where he's had stretches where he's been absurdly dominant and then stretches where he's been off the field a little bit, but his targets per route run is actually better than Robert Woods. Woods just never leaves the field. So if Kupp can stay on the field for a ton, I think his upside's pretty big. So I prefer him to the Tampa Bay guys in that range. I think I prefer Lockett to the Tampa Bay guys too, which might be aggressive. I'm a little weary about Evans and Godwin just because they spread the ball out so much. They might have a really positive game script. Antonio Brown's lurking. They have a lot of wide receiver depth. Those guys are fine here. I would take them. But if we're nitpicking, I do prefer the Seattle guys, the Rams guys to those guys. And then at the bottom of that tier, I probably prefer the younger guys and Chase more, Higgins a little bit more to Julio and Thielen, just because I think there's a little bit better chance they had a really, really high ceiling. But I'd still take Thielen and Julio, at the 4-5 turn if the Cincy guys are gone.
Yeah, Adam, rounds 3 through 6 are early rounds.
Yeah, I know.
I know. I guess.
Leagues are won and lost in the first 5 to 10 rounds, so I still consider 3 to 6 the middle. But go ahead.
Okay.
Well, Deebo's going to out target Ayuk. Sorry, Evan.
Really interesting. Well, Ayuk's going to crush him in air yards. So.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about Julio, though, because I've got him wide receiver 16 right now in my rankings. And every draft that I do, like he's, prominently featured like right in the fourth round in the group that I'm looking at. And I don't want to get too much of him.
Yeah.
But I think that the industry is pretty low on him right now. His high stakes ADP is like wide receiver 20 or so. I guess I have him at wide receiver 16. I think the Titans are going to throw a lot more this year than they have over the past 2 years. Again, Todd Downing has a pass first background, and their defense is going to be awful. And I don't trust their offense to maintain efficiency and also to really stick with the run like they did under Arthur Smith. So I don't know. I think that Julio is kind of a value. He was number 4 among wide receivers in yards per route run last year. He's still playing at a pretty high level. I don't think you can bet on him to really get close to 17 games. I would love 13 games out of him. But I don't know. How are you guys feeling about Julio right now?
Yeah, so I think this is a good time. We've gotten a lot of questions about Silva's rankings versus the top 300 rankings. If you have the draft kit, please note Silva's top 150 are his personal rankings. The rest of the rankings are a blend of Silva's top 150 and full staff opinions. And so we have Julio Jones closer to wide receiver 19 in most of the other formats. Silva has him at wide receiver 16. The concerns on Julio for me are at this age, a wide receiver changing teams has just an absolutely abysmal track record. I mean, it is absolutely awful. We know Julio is going to be banged up. As Evan said, 13 games I think would be a win. I'm okay with Julio. I think I prefer the Rams guys. I prefer Tyler Lockett, certainly prefer Amari. But yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to it. The age model, though, is not kind to Julio, Thielen, very much at all. Leone, what do you think about Julio?
I don't have too many strong takes here. I'm kind of indifferent. And we talk about, wide receiver 16 versus wide receiver 20 for Julio. It's a really tight tier. You're taking a receiver. You're kind of taking your personal preference. It's not like these are big gaps. We have wide receiver 16 in our rankings as 34th overall in PPR. And then we have wide receiver 21 as 40th overall. So it's literally all receivers, in this range of the draft. I do think, the Titans, I agree with Evan. They're going to throw more than last year. Combination of natural regression and just the personnel dictating it. But they're going to throw a lot less than the Falcons did. I think the target share is going to lean towards AJ Brown more than Julio, but that's the one that I'm most uncertain about, where right now I have Julio around, a 23% target share, 23%, and AJ Brown around 25%. And part of that's the age model. Part of that's just how absurd AJ Brown has been. And he's the one who's been with Tennessee and not switching teams. But it wouldn't shock me if Julio out-targeted AJ Brown. And then all of a sudden you are talking a guy that, went in the 4th round that should have gone in the 3rd round, in the early 3rd. So there are some routes to Julio really smashing if AJ Brown gets hurt, if Derrick Henry gets hurt, or if we're just wrong on the target share there. But from a base case, I do just kind of feel a little bit better than the other guys. I think Julio versus DJ Moore is a really interesting comp where not comp, but like, who would you take between those two? Like, it's an interesting head to head for me.
DJ Moore's like a decade younger.
Yeah, obviously for me, DJ Moore, come on.
So that's kind of what our rankings are reflecting, but it's, one's in a better offense, much more efficient quarterback in Julio Jones with really only 2 passing options, but another guy's like a young ascending player who, despite some of the drawbacks in the offenses he's played in, has racked up pretty absurd seasons relative to his age, if you look at it historically. So those are kind of the decisions you end up facing. And I generally side with the younger player, but it's not, I just want to be like, it's not a slam dunk.
Sure.
Yeah. And I do have Tyler Lockett and Amari Cooper ahead of Julio Jones, as you mentioned, Adam, earlier, but I've been considering moving Julio down because I don't want, all the ETR subscribers that are using the rankings to get him like in every single draft.
Yeah.
Which is kind of where he's positioned right now. So I think that tonight I'm going to move him down.
Yeah. By the way, Leone, while you were talking about not really having a take and percentage of target shares, half the audience fell asleep. So just be aware of that for the spreadsheet virgins out there. Okay. Couple other guys that I am targeting kind of at the back end of this range. Jerry Jeudy, Odell Beckham, Tyler Boyd, I think are all strong. I've been shying away a little bit from Michael Gallup. We'll get to that stuff in a minute. I want to go back to the question of, is wide receiver deep? Because I know you guys both touched on this. I think there's like 40 or so wide receivers that are pretty strong, and that sounds like a lot. But in some formats, I mean, my God, those 40 or 45 wide receivers are gone before we even get to pick 80. And like Leone said, if you're using our rankings in the middle rounds, we're just pounding wide receiver. These guys are gone by like pick 80, pick 85. So if you are thin at wide receiver heading to round 9 and 10 and you're in a wide receiver heavy room, I mean, you're in trouble. You start to get into guys that I'm okay with. I like Elijah Moore. I like Michael Pittman. I like Rondale Moore. Maybe you could get away with Russell Gage or something. But if you're thin going to round 9, 10, 11 at wide receiver, I think you're in trouble. So I think my point here is that wide receiver is not as deep as people think it is because so many come off the board so fast. Evan, what do you think about that take, that it's really not as deep as people think it is?
I completely agree. And I think Leone used an interesting term to describe it, like the waterfall effect. Mm-hmm. There is like a drop off to just guys that are usable, that guys that you want to be starting every single week, you want to be trotting out every single week, to guys that are just kind of usable and are nice, like, back into the, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 7, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 5 as you're building, a wide receiver group in best ball, or, maybe guys that you want to have on the bench, but not guys that you want to be trotting out every single week. There's a lot of those guys, when the waterfall starts to fall off.
And I, go ahead, Leone, but I just want to suggest quickly that people listen to the podcast Leone and I did about season long managed versus best ball, because there's a huge difference here in wide receiver where we actually have to pick who we have to start at wide receiver each week in a home league. Best ball, we're not. And I think that makes a huge difference with what you can get late. But go ahead on if wide receiver is actually deep, Leone.
Well, and because we have to pick who we're starting, if we're not comfortable with the wide receiver edge that we've built early, if we haven't drafted a good chunk of wide receivers we're comfortable starting out of the gate, we might draft more conservatively than when we hit these double digit rounds, because we need, Russell Gage to fill, the points that he's projected for, or some of these, or Marvin Jones to, the points he's projected for. And those guys are fine. Like they're probably going to score pretty well. But I want to be in a position where I'm so comfortable at wide receiver, I'm taking McCole Hardman, I'm taking Rondale Moore, because I don't need those guys to start from week 1 for me. And I can take a chance at hitting that huge upside. And it's a lot harder to do that when you've put yourself in a position where these guys you're drafting are starters. And again, if you're in a league where you can start 4 wide receivers, I mean, that means you probably needed to have already drafted like 5 or so by the time you hit this 10th round or so where these guys start to go.
Yep. Okay. Let's talk some sleepers. Okay. And I'm like Leone said, if you are doing it what we think is right and have a lot of really good options already, you can swing for the fences at wide receiver. I'll give you guys 3 that I like. And I know I'm probably taking some that you guys like, but I'll give you guys 3 quote unquote sleepers that I like. I think the market has overreacted to Carson Wentz's injury when it comes to Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman is far and away the best wide receiver athlete on this Colts team. T.Y. Hilton is dusted. I think Zach Pascal is like a 4th wide receiver at best. Paris Campbell has barely played in the last 2 years and is a slot guy. The Bible narrative between Michael Pittman and Carson Wentz is absolutely through the roof. So that's one of my favorite ones. I think his ADP has dipped into the sleeper range now. Rondale Moore, Evan and I talked about it. Leone talked about it. I don't think we need to go into it much further here. Even if Rondale Moore doesn't start in 3 wide receiver sets to open this season, I think the coaches will find that their best 3 wide receiver formation is a mix of Christian Kirk and AJ Green on the outside opposite DeAndre Hopkins and Rondale Moore in the slot. Then the last sleeper that I'll say that I like is Terrace Marshall. I keep saying his name wrong. That's why I concentrated there. But Terrace Marshall, 6'2", big slot role. And I don't know if you can have a shower narrative between a coach and a college player, but I kind of think that you can. And Joe Brady handpicks Terrace Marshall to come in and play the big slot role between DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. As I've said many times, I think Sam Darnold will play much, much, much better away from Adam Gase, and with the right supporting cast, Terrace Marshall is part of that. So a little bit of a taste there. 3 sleepers that I like. Evan, you want to go next with maybe some under the radar wide receivers that you like?
Well, I think that Devontae Parker is not a sleeper, but just where he goes in terms of ADP, he's got to be one of the most undervalued players in all of fantasy this year. He is, I mean, I know he's had his ups and downs in his career, but he really is the closest thing that they have to a true alpha receiver. And that's nothing against Will Fuller, who's an absolute baller. But Will Fuller, like, I mean, he can't get on the field. He's suspended to open the season. He's going to open the season with having like never caught a ball from Tua in his life. So Devontae Parker, I think, is undervalued. I think that Marvin Jones is also undervalued. I think that if you were to set odds right now, he might be the favorite to lead the Jaguars in receiving at this point. Nelson Aguilar and Corey Davis are receivers that they're veteran receivers that, you know, they've been around. They're kind of not that sexy, but I think that they're both in good position to see a lot of air yards. Nelson Aguilar, I think, would definitely benefit if it's Mac Jones out there instead of Cam Newton. But no one wants to draft these guys. And therefore, I think that they're both undervalued late receivers that are both coming off really, really excellent seasons and are in position to lead their teams in air yards.
Yeah, quickly going back to what Evan said about DJ Chark and now bringing in Marvin Jones, I made a bet on DJ Chark under 905.5 receiving yards a couple days ago. That number might still be out there, actually. I don't even know, honestly, if it is, but I think it's good because there's so much uncertainty with how targets are going to go there. Evan already mentioned the DJ Chark injury, so under on the DJ Chark yards, I think, was really good for the prop people out there. Leone, we've talked a lot about it, guys. Anybody left that you like as sleepers, quote unquote?
You guys hit, most of the later round guys. I guess just before the late rounds, when I was saying if you're in a league where you take a running back early because you can win rounds 6 through 9, the guys in those rounds I get a lot are Robbie Anderson, Tyler Boyd, Michael Gallup, Deebo Samuel, those types of players who I think have a good combination of upside but solid role to start the year. I especially like players like, and I'll get your Gallup take here in a second, but players like Gallup and Boyd, where they're in these offenses that are going to concentrate on 3 guys and they're the third guy. And I think there's enough target share because they'll be so concentrated that's fine. They're also in offenses that are going to run a lot of plays and throw the ball a lot. So the total volume's okay, even if the target share is not that great, but those guys have a lot of room to grow because if one of the 2 receivers in front of them goes down, all of a sudden now the target share that was a little bit of a concern is a huge positive for them. So I like those types of players. And then I'll skip to like really deep leagues. A guy I've been drafting a lot lately is Josh Palmer for the Chargers, who looks like he's winning this third wide receiver spot. Really, big play guy, deep threat in college. I think that, if Justin Herbert's able to replicate the success he had on deep passing last year, which is a question mark, but if he can do it, I mean, there's a lot of upside in that role. And I mean, there's not a ton in front of him. Like obviously Keenan Allen's the alpha. He's going to stay the alpha, but Mike Williams never really commands a huge target share. He's had some injury problems in the past. So that role could grow as well. That's more of a deeper league where if you're, in a 15 round, 12 team league, you might not get to him, but if you're in a 14 team league, then he is worthy of a roster stash.
Based on the projected pass protection problems that Cincinnati is facing and just, the issues that they're kind of dealing with early in training camp or so far in training camp, we're not really early in training camp anymore. But I think that Tyler Boyd could come out the gate seeing like double-digit targets per game because he is going to be, the lowest ADOT among that 3 receiver set. He's a high percentage option. He and Joe Burrow have already hooked up for a bunch of, receptions. They have that built-in chemistry already. And just getting the ball out of Joe Burrow's hands quickly needs to be an emphasis for Cincinnati, I think, to begin the year. We know that he's going to end up with a lot of attempts. They're going to end up with a lot of total plays. I think that Tyler Boyd is an excellent target right now. If you're just looking for a guy that doesn't cost too much in drafts and could end up getting a lot of receptions, especially early in the year.
Love it. Absolutely love Tyler Boyd. Let me give my, as we maybe move to a couple busts here. I know we've already talked about some, but I think more worried than you guys are about Michael Gallup and the Dallas offense. I think it's really dangerous to assume Dallas is going to keep playing extremely pass heavy and keep playing extremely fast and keep getting so many pass attempts off when they're getting their offensive line back, when they're not going to be down by 30 points every game, when Zeke is allegedly in shape and ready to play. And I'm also concerned that when the chips are down, Michael Gallup will remain the boundary wide receiver, simply running vertical routes, and it's going to be the more talented or the better. And I love Michael Gallup, but Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb are better, and those guys are going to be inside. Those guys are going to be soaking up the easy targets. So as Michael Gallup in high stakes stuff, in tougher leagues, his ADP has gone through the roof. I've kind of been out on 6th round Michael Gallup, on 7th round Michael Gallup. In home leagues, maybe he gets to around 8, 9, 10, and I certainly like him there. I think it's just a case of being price sensitive for sure. But yeah, it sounds like I'm just lower on Dallas than you guys. I can't wait till we're on the clock in this FFPC 1800 draft, and I have to argue with you guys about Dallas stuff. But anyways,
they're going nuclear.
Evan, we've talked about a bunch of guys that maybe we're lower on. Any other guys you want to mention that maybe you're lower on the market?
No, I think that we pretty much hit on them.
Okay. Leone, any lower than market guys you're on?
Yeah. Well, one guy that I really struggle with is Brandon Ayuk, because I absolutely love the player. Every sharp person I know is on Brandon Ayuk, but his Fantasy Pros ADP right now is wide receiver 23. He's going in the 5th round. That's the type of guy that goes after this wide receiver drop off. And I don't know. I just don't see in that offense, I'm taking Debo a few rounds later, and that's where I think wide receiver flattens out. So I have a tough time because the player I love, it's the type of profile I love to bet on, but the cost just seems really high to me. So I'm kind of out on him. I
didn't even realize ADP. That his ADP was that high at wide receiver 20. I have him wide receiver 28.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense. And that's what he's a top 30 receiver, but he's really getting boosted up. Okay. I don't have too many pure busts though.
I wanted to mention one more, and that's Kenny Galladay, and his ADP has started.
The one I was going to say, that was the other one I lost. Yeah.
Look at this. We're in lockstep here, Leone.
Man and machine.
But Kenny Galladay, man, this is headed for disaster. I think. He's not getting any time in with Daniel Jones. He's, a downfield clasher. He barely played last year. He's sitting out with a hamstring injury. He checks the red flag box of being he came out of college. He was kind of old. So he's kind of veering towards 30 and changing teams. The offense just could be a complete disaster. I've got him deep into the 40s among wide receivers. And I don't know, the last time I checked, his wide receiver or his ADP was like wide receiver 33, wide receiver 35. Mm-hmm. So people maintaining optimism just based on the name value. I think that this is going to end up being a disaster. I think it's going to be a situation where he mixes in. He has a few big plays over the course of the year, but he's maddeningly inconsistent, and a lot of empty air yards for Kenny Galladay this year.
All right. Last thing I'm going to ask you guys, and I'm afraid to do this after what happened in the quarterback episode, but it is tight at the top. Who do you think will finish as the wide receiver one? Not a bold call, not pull it out of your ass. Who do you actually think will finish as the wide receiver one this year? I can make a case for a bunch of guys for sure. Leone, do you want to go first? Who will be the wide receiver one this year?
Davante Adams. I just think the amount of targets he is going to see is so special from a pure target share from a quarterback that has had a late career resurgence and was extremely efficient last season. And Aaron Rodgers, no reason to think he won't be somewhat at that level again this year. And also his goal line usage for a wide receiver is so unique. That's the thing that separates him from Stephon Diggs for me, where the Bills are kind of like whoever they can get open to score the touchdown. It might be last year it was Lee Smith on like garbage plays, but for the Packers, Rodgers and Adams have plays that they're running that no other team runs as consistently as the Packers from the 1-2 yard line. They're kind of layup touchdowns for Adams. And that goal line role gives him the slight edge for me over Diggs, even though I do think Diggs, has some nuclear outcomes just because the Bills are so persistent in throwing the football.
Evan?
Yeah, I think that the number one argument I think to make against Davante Adams would be an argument against Aaron Rodgers, who had a 9.1% touchdown rate last year. And I think his touchdown rate, over the course of his career, he's had a very high touchdown rate. I think it's around like 6.5%. But I think it's very likely to regress back toward the mean, for his mean career average. And so that's going to trickle down directly to Devontae. I still think Devontae is, if you're going to bet a receiver to lead the NFL in receiving touchdowns, Devontae Adams probably at the top of your list, but he scored 18 last year, and I think he missed 2 games. So that's going to be really, really tough to sustain. I'm going with Tyreek Hill. And it's, I think that he's going to set a career high in targets, no Sammy Watkins. And I think that he's going to, and there is also a chance that we see Travis Kelce take a little bit of a step back. He's well past the age 30, and Tyreek Hill still firmly in his prime. So I'm going with Tyreek.
Yeah. The one thing on Tyreek is if he goes from, a 23% target share, don't fall asleep on me, people. If he goes from that, which is pretty low for an alpha receiver 1, like that's low for Diggs and Adams. We're talking nearing 30%. If Tyreek Hill goes from 23% to 27%, I mean, it's lights out.
Forget about it.
There was a stretch last year where Tyreek Hill did do that. And I was actually playing Tyreek Hill in cash, and people were mocking me as I was shoving it down their throat. Although I did play Tyreek a couple times after that kind of run of his target share was over, and it wasn't great. I actually have Tyreek Hill and Steph Diggs for me over Devontae Adams for a lot of the reasons that Evan said. Simple touchdown rate regression from Aaron Rodgers. I don't think that Devontae Adams
they're going to throw more if they're not scoring touchdowns every other play, though. I mean, it's going to balance out a little bit.
Okay, that's fair. So
you're coming for Robert Tonyan.
So Tyreek Hill would be the answer for me as well. I will say, though, I think Calvin Ridley has a really good chance to finish as the wide receiver 1 overall, as long as Matt Ryan does not fall off of a cliff. The way that Calvin Ridley is used, not only does he go extremely deep down the field, he also has a really high catch rate. Like among guys who go deep down the field as deep as he does, top 10 catch rate. Also, unlike Julio, has a major red zone role. So, man, Calvin Ridley's role is just ridiculous. And we could see 31% would not shock me. Target share for Calvin Ridley, which is just absolutely out of this world.
I think he definitely gets there in air yard share. Like they don't have anybody else to run deep routes. Russell Gage, Kyle Pitts, Hayden Hurst, Olamide Zaccheaus. I mean, he's 5'8", 188 and runs 4.6. Like Ridley is going to be running deep this season.
I can't wait to tweet out Calvin Ridley usage stats. It's going to be full 3.9 because he's going to be just used in just outrageous ways. All right. We've gone long enough. We've said it all on wide receivers here. If you have not picked up the draft kit yet, again, $34.99. I wanted to make it $134.99. Silva told me no, it has to be $34.99. So now it's basically free. For Evan. For Leone. For producer Luke. I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.